I want to retire a word today stress. There is no such thing as stress. I know that sounds wrong. I know stress is possibly the most commonly used word in modern life. I know that your doctor told you to reduce it. Your wellness apps tracks it and you have been told more times than you can count that it is a primary driver of your condition. And all of that is true. And the word stress is still almost useless. And I'll explain why. The word stress is an umbrella, and under that umbrella are hiding, unnamed, often unrecognized, every specific emotion that you were not told to name out. The fears, the angers, the griefs, and the shames, each with its own face, each with its own biological signature, and each doing something specific to your body that the umbrella term hides from view. And as long as you keep the umbrella closed, and as long as the word stress stands in for all of them, you cannot work with any of them. The body cannot complete its response. The nervous system cannot discharge. Because the body does not respond to the word stress. The body responds to specific emotional states, and it needs a specific name to complete the circuit. Welcome to episode 5 of the Som Shadow podcast. I am Abhinav Sharma. And this insight came first from my own life, from watching how long I called things stressed or stress that had specific names that I was not ready to say. And today we open that umbrella. Let's first go over a brief history of the word, where it came from and why it was always a problem. So Hans Selye, Hungarian-Canadian endocrinologist who began using the word stress first. He borrowed from engineering, where it describes the force exerted on a material and to describe the body's non-specific response to demands. He meant something precise, the general alarm response of the body before you're named that what you're responding to. Now, he did not mean fear. He did not mean anger, nor he meant grief. He meant the undifferentiated response before any of them had been identified. Towards the end of his life, in an interview, Salye said that he regretted the word. He said that he should have used the word strain because stress in English already carried connotations that he did not intend, and yet it became a basket, a holding container for everything that was too specific, too emotionally charged, or socially inconvenient to name. What do you say? I'm stressed at work, stressed about the kid, I'm stressed about money, I'm stressed about my parents. 4 sentences, but 4 completely different emotional realities, all collapsed into one vague word. I'll not even call it vague, it's a lazy word. Now, the body cannot work with a vague word. The body needs the specific reality underneath. And that is what we are going to find. Now, what is actually underneath each? Let me walk through the 4 most commonly emotional states that people call stress. And let's name what is precisely underneath each one. Now, when stressed at work is fear, when you say you are stressed at work, what is the specific thing you are afraid of? It could be fear of being found out, that someone is going to discover that you're not as capable as they believe, now that you have been performing competence and today is the day the performance fails. What if they find out I don't know what I'm doing? Fear of getting it wrong in a way that cannot be undone, letting down someone who trusted you. I can't afford to get this wrong. The fear of the person in the room whose displeasure feels really catastrophic, whose disapproval activates something very old in the nervous system, something that has nothing to do with this job and everything to do with the environment in which disapproval felt like actual danger. Now you see different fears, different physiological signatures, different cortisol patterns, and all wearing the same level. Now, when stressed about kids is a stack, this one is almost never a single emotion. It's always 3 at once. Fear that you are going to fail them, that your choices will hurt them in ways that you will not come to know for maybe around 20 years. Now, what if I'm getting this wrong and I won't know for 2 decades? Second is anger. Nobody told you it would be this hard, that the support you were promised is not there. that the other people in this equation or in this role are not carrying equal weight. Why is all of this mine to do, mine to carry? Third, grief. Grief for the version of yourself that existed before children. You set aside certain ambitions, the identity that has become entirely a role and barely anything else. I don't know who I am anymore outside of this role of a parent. So you see 3 different emotions, 3 different responses, and all bundled into stressed about the kids. The body is responding to all 3 simultaneously without a name for any of them. So when stressed about money is survival fear, this is almost always at its root the oldest fear. The fear of not surviving, not of being uncomfortable but not surviving. The primal fear of not having enough to continue existing. Nervous system does not distinguish between financial and physical danger, and both can activate the full alarm response. Both produce the same kind of emergency or biochemistry in the body that is sitting at a desk. So when survival fear runs chronically in the background, the body is in perpetual emergency and always dealing with thyroid disease, autoimmunity, or metabolic illness. Now that emergency load is not a neutral background noise. It's additional burden on something, on a system that is already under strain. Now stressed about my parents, that is grief. And this one contains more grief than most people recognize. Grief of watching someone you have always depended on and become someone who depends on you now. The reversal that nobody prepared you for. The grief that I'm losing them slowly and I have to keep functioning while I do that, while I lose them. There's a part of anger also here, and this is the anger that people are most reluctant to name because it produces immediate shame. That anger is parents need so much, timing is terrible, I was working and now they need this much. That some part of you wants your life back. Now shame is what kind of person resents their own parents? A human one, carrying grief, anger and guilt simultaneously with no language for any of them and calling it all stress. Shame, the one nobody names because naming itself is shameful. Now shame does not usually announces itself as stress. It is usually underneath. Low hum of not being quite right, of having caused this, of being the person who ends up with this diagnosis, these symptoms because of the anger that you swallowed. So when you first start looking at it, you start saying to yourself, I did this to myself. If I had just managed things better. Shame is the most hidden emotional state, most likely to be called stress because to name it precisely is to admit that it is there. And for most of us, the admission itself, it takes a lot of courage. But shame has its own physiological signature, which is very distinct from fear, anger, or grief. And when it runs chronically, unnamed, it does specific things to the inflammatory markers of the body. Now, it cannot be discharged with stress or stress management techniques. It needs to be named, then separated from the self because shame that is examined almost always turns out to be misplaced. Now, you have to understand this, that you did not cause your illness by failing to manage your emotions. You adapted to an environment that didn't have a name for any of the emotions or a room. Now, why the body needs the exact name? I want to make the case for why naming a specific emotion matters, not just psychologically, but also physiologically. Now, researchers studying emotional states and their biological correlates found that different emotions produce different physiological signatures. Now, that we have already seen. Fear and anger activates different arms of the nervous system. Grief has a distinct neuroendocrine profile from either of them, and shame produces a cortisol spike followed by a rapid drop combined with inflammatory markers, a pattern that is very distinct from the others. Now, what this means in practice, and this is my observation, not proof, is that the body responds differently to a named specific emotion than it does to an unnamed generalized state. So when you say stress, it's not doing anything much. But when the emotion is named precisely, something appears to recognize that the circuit, you can say, is now complete. There is a sense that the client reports within a few days of practice of something releasing slightly. Now, whether that is a direct physiological effect of the naming or a downstream effect, I cannot say with certainty. What I can say is that it is consistent enough across clients to be significant. Now, keep the label vague and the body keeps running its best guess emergency responses to something it cannot identify. Name the specific emotion and the body at least know what it's working with, and then the discharge can begin. Now, 1 week, one habit. This week's question. Uncomfortable at first, but stick with it. For 1 week, every time you are about to say the word stress, stop. One breath and then ask what I'm actually feeling and what about specifically. Now, it does not need to be said out loud. You can say it to yourself in your own words, in your own language, in your own head. It can be, I'm afraid that I will disappoint him. I'm angry that this is mine to carry again. I am grieving the version of the, could be a week that I thought I was going to have. I am ashamed that I reacted the way I did. Say that thing specifically instead of the word stressed. Do this for 7 days. Most people will notice something different within 3 or 4 days. A small but perceptible sense of something that has been that had been running without completion beginning to close. 7 days of this practice will shift more than most people have shifted in years of, I'll say, stress management or generic stress. Coming to this week's question. What emotion have you been calling stress for so long that you have forgotten it has a more specific name? Now, you don't need to answer that right now. Let it find its answer over the next 7 days. A name will arrive. The body has been waiting for someone to ask. Next, episode 6, we are going to spend the whole episode on one word. That word is anxiety. Because anxiety is doing something slightly different from stress, but it needs the same precision. So if this episode named something, save it. Send it to the person in your life who describes their whole inner experience or outer as just stressed, and they will hear themselves in this. Thank you for being here.